Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, man. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual, man. You guys know the deal on this channel. It's all about setting the record straight, stopping the lies, stopping the narratives, stopping them from rewriting history, guys. And in this video, we're going to stop Paul George. Paul George from, these guys expose themselves. So we got to set the record straight on Paul George. And, we have to stop him from trying to rewrite history here. And Paul George is over here talking on a podcast. I heard this clip of Paul George on a podcast talking about how his Indiana Pacers, they would have won a championship if it wasn't for LeBron James' Miami Heat, right? He's like, oh, man, if LeBron James wasn't in the East, man, then we probably would have won a championship. So he's trying to basically, do the Michael Jordan thing where, people say, hey, man, I didn't win a championship because Michael Jordan, right? Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, Reggie Miller, Karl Malone, John Stockton. The list goes on. And you can literally, correlate that to Michael Jordan's greatness. These guys did not win because of Michael Jordan, right? That's what Paul George is essentially saying in this clip that I saw on his podcast. Yeah, man, we ran to LeBron James. If LeBron James wasn't in the East, if LeBron James wasn't around, we probably would have won a championship. I started laughing when he said that because does he really believe that his Indiana Pacers team was good enough to beat some of those top teams in the West? I don't believe so, because all he's doing is exposing the weak Eastern Conference of LeBron James. Dominated. And we're going to talk about in this video, guys. And I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world. Excuse me, guys. Everyone across the states has been supporting my channel, guys. I want to send a special thanks out to a couple people here. I'm going to send a special thanks out to Hold It Down 45 for the comment that you left earlier that inspired me to do that video earlier about Nikola Jokic, man. So shout out to Hold It Down 45. David Bulgaria for sending me emails. Thank you, David Bulgaria. I've seen you guys. Shout out to Ronnie Price, Joshua Gonzalez, Harvey Lackey, Carlos Rivera. Shout out to all you guys. I hope I said your names right. Thank you very much, everyone. Shout out to everybody in the membership. Thank you very much, guys. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, man, I wanted to talk about this clip I heard of Paul George talking about how his Pacers team probably would have won a championship if it wasn't for LeBron James, right? He's literally blaming his Pacers not winning on LeBron James because LeBron James is so great. We couldn't get past LeBron James, man. He just dominated the East, and there was nothing that we can do. But if he wasn't there, we would have been able to win a championship. I really believe that. Paul George started talking about, we were right there, man. We were the team. He started talking about how he felt like he was that dude in the Eastern Conference. And so, once again, I'm laughing. The whole time I'm listening to this guy, I'm laughing, man. I'm like, what is this guy talking about? These guys are delusional. They forget when they played. The way that they talk about the Eastern Conference in the 2010s, Paul George, LeBron James, some of these other clowns out here, they make it seem like they were playing in the 90s East. They really want you to believe that they were playing in the 90s Eastern Conference, guys. And remember, I did that video on the head-to-head between the East and the Western Conference in the 90s, guys, from 1990 to 1998. The direct Western Conference versus Eastern Conference. And I told you the East was like 3 wins more. That's how close and identical, that's how balanced the league was. There was no weak East beating up on or getting beat up on by a stronger West, or a weak West being beat up on by a strong East. That's why sometimes when we talk about the 2000s, the 2010s, from like 2005 to like 2015, as weak as ever was, that's why sometimes when we look at the Western Conference during that time and you see how many 50-win teams there were in the West, there's a reason for that, guys, because they were beating up all these crappy Eastern Conference teams. They were padding their win totals going against these crap teams in the East. Same thing for LeBron James, and that's why he, quote-unquote, dominated the Eastern Conference. He went to 8 straight NBA Finals. So Paul George is talking as if he's played in the Eastern Conference of the 90s. Not even close, dude. This dude literally said, yeah, man, we were that next team. We were that team right there. This dude said, yeah, man, we were able, the John Wall, Bradley Beal Wizards couldn't beat us. He said that like that was impressive. The Bradley Beal, John Wall Wizards were supposed to be impressed with that team. Marcin Gortat, Nene Hilario. And I'm not knocking these guys. John Wall is a good player, man. Bradley Beal, you know how I feel about Bradley. Don't even get me started on Bradley Beal, man. That dude's completely overrated. That dude is, to me, way overblown, way overpaid. But anyway, John Wall and Bradley Beal are not a duo. You know what I'm saying? They're not some dynastic combo. No one was worried about that team. They were never contenders. They were never legit. They were a mediocre basketball team at that time. That's all that was. When Paul George actually brought them up to say, hey, man, they couldn't beat us. This dude then go down and said, the Atlanta Hawks couldn't beat us. The Atlanta Hawks with Kyle Korver and Al Horford and Jeff Teague, Josh Smith, Devin Harris. And these are solid players, man. Josh Smith, solid player. Al Horford, solid player. Still playing today, right? Jeff Teague's a clown. Solid player, man. Devin Harris, solid players. But ain't none of these guys all-world. Ain't none of these guys, I'm like, wow, man, that team was stacked. But remember, that Atlanta Hawks team won 60 games. I think that was, 2015? I think they won 60 games, guys. But Paul George brought the Atlanta Hawks. Like, that was some powerhouse team. Oh, the Atlanta Hawks couldn't beat us. And he brought the Carmelo Anthony Knicks. Once again, you guys know how I feel about the Carmelo Anthony Knicks. They were never legit contenders, guys. Never that. And like I said, we could talk about why. They couldn't get past the Pacers, right? But we could talk about the Miami Heat. But once again, the weak Eastern Conference, the Knicks were never contenders, man. Amari Stoudemire's punching blackboards and missing playoff games. And he was all jacked up when he was on the Knicks. That was not the Amari Stoudemire from the Phoenix Suns. Carmelo Anthony was good on the Knicks, but he was never going to lead them anywhere because Carmelo Anthony, to me, was never a number one guy like that. Was never just going to lead your team like that because he never adjusted or adapted his game to other things. Carmelo Anthony came in a score, and he left a score. That was it. Never was a rebounder, never a defender, never a leader, never worked on his leadership, the intangibles, never did other things. Remember, it was Carmelo Anthony who ran Jeremy Lin out of town. So they were going crazy with Linsanity. Carmelo Anthony came back from the injury, and they ran Jeremy Lin out of town. Never saw Jeremy Lin again, man. Once again, Carmelo Anthony looking good, playing for Mike D'Antoni. Right? James Harden looked good playing for Mike D'Antoni. And you had, what's his name? Mike Woods in there. But I wasn't impressed with the New York Knicks. But Paul George brings the New York Knicks, who couldn't even beat the Pacers. They couldn't even beat the Pacers. I remember that game 6. The Knicks lost 4 games to 2. I think that was like their best chance. It was like 2013, I want to say, maybe 2014, somewhere around there. The Knicks played the Pacers, I believe, in the second round. And they had a matchup with the Miami Heat. No, wait, the Miami Heat were waiting in the conference finals. And I remember the Knicks were playing. I remember that game 6. Knicks were down 3 games to 2. And I remember I think the Knicks were down by like 1 point, I want to say. Something like that. The score might have been tied, or they were down by 1 or something like that. I remember Carmelo Anthony drove baseline and went to slam dunk the basketball. And I remember Roy Hibbert literally grabbing the ball like right out of the rim. Like his hand was like, you know what I'm saying? Like covering the rim and just throwing it out of there. And that was the end of the game essentially for the New York Knicks. They never really got close again to making the Eastern Conference Finals. But I remember Carmelo Anthony, because they're getting rejected by Roy Hibbert, man. I started laughing. I'm like, Roy Hibbert was looking like Hakeem Olajuwon out there. But could you imagine if these guys had to go against legit centers? Not Roy Hibbert, not Al Horford. You know what I'm saying? Not Marshawn Gartott. And I'm not knocking these guys. But that's not Patrick Ewing, man. That's not Hakeem Olajuwon. That's not David Robinson. That's not Dikembe Mutombo. That's not Shaquille O'Neal. That's not Alonzo Mourning. That's not Rick Smits. That's not Ronnie Cycli. That's not Brad Daugherty. That's not Robert Parrish, guys. That's none of them dudes. That's not Arvydas Sabonis. None of these guys, man. So, once again, Paul George is sitting here trying to hype up the East, like, and say, like, yo, man, we got past this team. We were better than that team. That team couldn't beat us. And he's talking as if that's impressive. You ain't beat no one. You named no one. No teams. No one. No, that's why we're not impressed with LeBron James, quote-unquote, dominating the Eastern Conference with 8 straight appearances. Ain't no one care about that stuff. No one's impressed with that. So Paul George is exposing himself and LeBron James' weak Eastern Conference without even realizing it. Because that's what happens, guys. When you talk about having to create narratives and lies and you're trying to rewrite history, all these guys do is expose themselves. So Paul George is sitting here on this microphone talking about, yeah, man, we would have won championships if it wasn't for LeBron James, man. He got in our way. We would have won championships. You know, we beat the Wizards. We beat the Hawks. The Knicks couldn't beat us. And I'm laughing. Dude, those are nobody teams, man. So let's say that LeBron James wasn't in the East, like Paul George is saying. LeBron James never played in the NBA. There was no LeBron James, which would actually be great for the NBA's history. But there was never a LeBron James. Never played in the NBA. So Paul George had his shot. They go to the NBA Finals, the Indiana Pacers, because they're the team to beat, right? Like he's claiming. Do you guys really believe that these Pacers teams with Paul George, Roy Hibbert, David West, who else on that team? George Hill was on that team. Lance Stevenson. You guys remember Lance Stevenson? He was on that team. You really believe that that team was good enough to beat the San Antonio Spurs in 2013 or 2014? I don't believe so. Were they good enough to beat the Golden State Warriors in 2015 or 2014 or 2016? Don't believe so. Were they good enough to beat I don't even know. What was the other team? The OKC Thunder. Were they good enough to beat the OKC Thunder in 2013 or 2014 or 2015? 2016? I don't believe so. But they've been good enough to beat the grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies with, was it Tony Allen and Zach Randolph and Mark Gasol and Mike Conley? Would they have been able to beat? I don't believe they were able to beat that, because these are the teams that were losing in the Western Conference. Two teams like the Warriors, two teams like the Spurs, right? And these were the teams that the Miami Heat were playing against in the finals. Would that Indiana Pacers team been able to beat the Dallas Mavericks? I don't think so. So these are the kinds of things that we have to think about, ladies and gentlemen. The competition in the West was much more stiffer from, like I said, 2005 to 2015, when Paul George is talking about he would have won a championship if LeBron James wasn't there. No, you would not have. You would have just lost in the NBA Finals. That's all that would have happened. You would have lost in the NBA Finals instead of the conference finals. That's all that would have happened, dude. Your conference was weak as hell. The Toronto Raptors with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. Are we supposed to be impressed with that? Jonas Valanciunas? Not impressive at all. These are mediocre to good teams. They're not great teams. They're not really good teams. Not being led by really good or great all-time great players. Come on, man. Carmelo Anthony, the best player that I mentioned here. And I'm not impressed with him. Paul George, like I said, not impressed with these teams and him talking like this. Because, like I said, all he's doing is exposing LeBron James and himself this way. That's all he did there. LeBron James down in the weak East, and you just clarified that for us. You named John Wall and Bradley Beal's Wizards as if that was some team that we were supposed to be impressed by you mentioning. Insane. Like I said, he's talking as if he played in the 90s East, going against Dominic Wilkins' Hawks, or Michael Jordan's Bulls, or Patrick Ewing's Knicks, or Brad Daugherty, Mark Price's Cavaliers, right? You're not going against these teams, right? Charles Barkley's Sixers in the early 90s? No, not going against these teams, right? Not at all. None of these teams are like that. The teams that you just mentioned, they couldn't shine the shoes of a lot of those teams I just mentioned. Just couldn't. The Miami Heat later on with Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning, right? The Shaquille O'Neal Orlando Magic with him and Penny. Do you think the Indiana Pacers team in 2012 or 13, whatever that was, is beating the 95 or the 95 Orlando Magic? The 96 Orlando Magic? I don't believe so. So once again, I just don't see what Paul George is talking about. These guys are insane to speak this way, thinking that they're promoting themselves. Oh, I would have won a title. No, I think we can say Reggie Miller maybe could have won a title in 98. We could say maybe Karl Malone would have won a title in 98 or 97. Maybe Sean Kemp could have won a title in 96, right? Maybe Charles Barkley could have won a title in 93, right? We could say that because their teams were great. Their teams were good enough. Paul George's team wasn't good enough, and your conference was weak. You were never tested, really. Who are you going against? Nobody. But you won't say that. You won't make it seem like your team was so formidable. It was the Miami Heat, LeBron James, and his greatness that stopped you guys. Nonsense. LeBron James wasn't that great, which is why he had a former super team. In the weakest conference in history, he had a former super team just to win. Think about that. And he still lost more than he won. Paul George needs to shut up and just stop. I feel like he's one of the dumbest talking guys I've ever heard. And I really don't understand, because the dude's been a celebrity. He's been in front of a microphone for years now. And these guys just never develop a sense of how to speak. They don't know the issue of the game. Like I said, the way he's talking is that we're supposed to be impressed with the 2013 Hawks, or the 2014 Hawks, or the 2013 Wizards, or the 2013 Knicks. We're supposed to be impressed with some of these teams that he threw out there. And like I said, for him to try to make it seem like LeBron James was so great, that's what blocked him from winning a championship, is hilarious to me, right? Is that what Carmelo Anthony's going to say? Oh, I got blocked from winning a championship by LeBron James. No, you got blocked from winning a champion or going to a championship, not winning a championship, from maybe going to a finals or a conference finals. Yeah, maybe you got blocked that way with the stupid team LeBron James built up. But LeBron James ain't that great. It wasn't his greatness that was holding you guys back. It wasn't at all. And you guys didn't raise your level to play like that. You never did. That's why I laugh when LeBron James going all these straight finals, going against who? Paul George and Roy Hibbert? Like I said, Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire? Bradley Beal and John Wall? You're going against no one, man. You ain't going against anybody. There's no one out there. Like I said, when Derrick Rose went down in the Chicago Bulls, that was it. That was only competition. That was the only team that I can tell that was going to be formidable enough to maybe challenge the Miami Heat. Maybe. And the only reason I say that is because they were a hard-nosed, scrappy defensive team. And they had guys. You had, obviously, Derrick Rose. But you had guys like Luol Deng, right, who was a good, solid two-way player, right? You had guys like Taj Gibson, who was like a heart and soul kind of guy, going to go in there and give you the effort, right? Bang around for the rebound. You had a Joakim Noah, who was one of those just stout defensive guys down low, really good rebounder. Didn't have much offensively, but he's going to do all the little things. He's going to do all the dirty work, right? He's going to play that defense right there, right? You had guys like Kurt Heinrich, you had glue guys, right? You had a team, right? And, there was different iterations of the Chicago Bulls, Ben Gordon and Jimmy Butler, some of the guys that were on that team. So you had some players, man. You had a team. And like I said, they were a very solid defensive team. They were coached by Tom Thibodeau. So to me, like I said, and Derrick Rose was on that level. He was an MVP winner, an MVP caliber guy. So you had a player of that level. To me, the other guys were not on that level. Carmelo Anthony, John Wall, Bradley Beal, Paul George, Roy Hibbert, David West, what's the other guy? Kyle Korver, Josh Smith, Al Horford. These guys, to me, they were not on that level, man. They just weren't. Derrick Rose was on that level. He was sensational. He was special, man. So Paul George, again, these guys speak, and all we hear is nonsense. Like I said, he's trying to talk up the East or talk up his Indiana Pacers and say, yeah, it was LeBron James that stopped us. We would have won if it wasn't for LeBron James. No, you wouldn't have, because your team was weak, your conference was weak, and you thought you guys were better than you really were. Same thing with LeBron James. LeBron James teams, or his fans think that his teams are better than they were, think he's greater than he is. When he actually gets tested against a real team, he folds up and loses. Like he did in 2011, like he did in 2014, right? They got bailed out in 2013. Right? How to beat a young OKC team in 2012. You guys know that these are the facts, man. Paul George, again, stop talking on the microphone. Podcast P, Pandemic P, Pinky P. Please stop, man. You've been exposed over and over and over again. You're not a playoff performer like that. You're very inconsistent when it matters most, man. Paul George had some moments, but more often than not, Paul George is not there. And ever since he left Indiana, after he had that horrific injury, but ever since he left Indiana, he ain't never been like that again. And like I said, the up and down nature of Paul George, missing so many games. I mean, this year to me was the culmination of Paul George over the last 5-6 years. This dude's become a frail, sensitive clown, asking for more money and no trade clauses. You got nerve, dude. You ain't never been that guy. And LeBron James' greatness is not the reason why you guys never won a championship. All right? Understand that it was LeBron James' super team that prevented you from going to a championship. But you guys would have never beat any of those Western Conference teams, in my opinion. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.